Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
So with that, I will come over to Beryl to open with karakia, particularly today around Matariki.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi mahana o te tauhou Māori. Matariki te tipua, matariki te tawhito, tai mai te wairua, tai mai I ngā ira atua, mai I ngā ira tangata. Tihei Māori ora.
Thank you, Beryl. I will move to apologies. Do we have any apologies? So Trevor Tufnell and Councillor Mailing. So Councillor Tufnell for lateness and Councillor Mailing is on leave. I hope that's not me. Right, so we have no names registered for the public forum. Oh, sorry, someone move Councillor Dowlis. Apologies. Seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. So we'll move to declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in relation to today's meeting? If not, moving on. So we'll move to the reports. So they are in order in the agenda, and I'm informed that that is the order that we need to go through them in. So I will come across who's leading. So Dwayne, in terms of the referral report, adoption of scheduled fees and charges.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll largely take the report as read. We've deliberated on this. The fees and charges reflect those deliberations. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Right, it is open for questions, comments, or someone prepared to move and second. Moved Councillor Dowler. Is there a seconder? Councillor Butler. I can't see. Councillor Greener, you have a question? Or a comment? Or both?
I have a general observation. First of all, it's good to see the community providing feedback on our plan process and on the rates, adjustments and charges. But I do feel there is a bit of a disconnect with council's desire to encourage affordable housing, admittedly across Greenfields, what I don't necessarily support, but at the same time making quite substantial increases in various areas. As the submissions highlighted, there is a lot of pain around the community on the rates increases that are proposed and the charges contained in this report. No surprise that people are starting to become a bit more aware of the water charges and waste charges that are impacting on themselves and their businesses. And I think people are aware that these charges are on top of other increases that are occurring. I do feel, and I read with some satisfaction, some of the submissions around our charges for the $170 per hour charge. I think it's getting pretty high and probably unsustainable for this community. Might be sustainable for some businesses who are able to claim the tax deductions on those kinds of costs, but not for the general public. And if I was to extrapolate $178 an hour, I think we'd be looking at quite a substantial salary. Appreciate that these hourly rates include some costs, but I don't think our costs have gone up substantially that much. Pretty much most of it is a sunk cost anyway. But I do take on board, and I hope that future opportunity, clearly those who deliberated on this didn't take up that opportunity to apply a more tiered system to our charges. And I think even Federated Farmers, who I don't always agree with, actually pointed out that in their submissions. And this is not a new thing. Other councils do it as well. So appreciate the deliberations missed the opportunity. I'd hope they would seize that opportunity, but we haven't. It'll be left for a future council to take up that opportunity. So on that basis, there are some things in here that I don't support. Appreciate that this is pretty much pro forma. I had hoped, and I'm always in the minority on this council, that the majority would seize the opportunity to contain some of the costs. I don't think they have. And finally, as with this vote, which I think is important, and with the next vote, I'd like to call it division. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greening. Anything further in relation to the schedule of fees and charges? I don't have any further hands up or indications, so I will come back to the mover if they wish to have a right to reply. No, and we will come across to Robin to call the division.
Councillor Butler. Councillor Dowler.
For.
Councillor Greening.
Against.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Mayor King.
For.
Councillor McKenzie.
For.
Councillor McNamara.
For.
Councillor Ogilvie. Councillor Tufnell. Oh, sorry, he's not here, sorry. Councillor Turley. Councillor Walker.
For.
Motion's carried.
The motion is carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the adoption of the annual plan. So normally this is under the auspices of Alan. So Alan, over to you.
Morena, Mr Mayor and councillors. So clearly the purpose of this report is to adopt the annual plan for the 2022-23 year. As you know, we've been through a public consultation process. We've held submissions and you made decisions on changes following that consultation on the 24th of May. Those changes have been incorporated into the draft annual plan that you have attached to this report for adoption. One of those post-consultation changes was to fund 500,000 of the additional costs of implementing the Water Services Act through the Three Waters Better Off funding. That's resulted in a rates revenue increase of 5.05%, which is lower than either of the options that we had in the consultation document. It's important that the annual plan is adopted today so that we can firstly meet our statutory deadlines and secondly, it enables us to strike rates for the new financial year. With that, I'll take the report as read. I understand Leonie might want to talk about the recent information on the dam cost and how that relates to the annual plan.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Alan. Leonie.
So councillors would have received a update from Waimea Water Limited around the Waimea Community Dam. At the moment, they are indicating additional costs to complete the dam. We're not sure what these are at this stage. They are indicating to complete around 195. And this is obviously disappointing to find it's out today, but it doesn't impact our annual plan. The costs will occur in the last quarter. And we would be borrowing for those anyway, and so it had very minimal impact on our operational expenditure. Noting that the dam also is looking to be delayed, and so the operational costs will be reduced, so we can cover that the dollars all for that. Again, it's important that we adopt the annual plan today. As I said before, this news doesn't impact our operational costs for the year and our overall budget. So I would encourage councillors to take that in mind when they consider this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leonie. Right, it is open for questions. I'll look to have it moved and seconded before opening it up. Uh,
I'm happy to move the general.
So move Councillor Bryan, Deputy Mayor Bryan, seconded Councillor Dowler. So it's open for discussion, comment, feedback, etc. Councillor McNamara, then Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, just on the topic of the lab report, it's entirely inexcusable that we keep getting these reports on the day of or the night before we're expected to discuss them. And we've said this over and over again for the past 4 or 5 years, how long they've been giving us these reports, that we'd like them in advance, and you can't tell me they didn't know the information in it a week ago.
I'll respond to that to the chair. We only received this information ourselves 2 days ago, and the final presentation only received yesterday afternoon with the final costings and timeframes. So it was new for us as well. So I understand, and I think yes, that is disappointing that you didn't get it sooner. As again I said, but this doesn't impact our annual plan that we're adopting this morning. And we will be talking about this further when Waimea Water Limited will come to the Operations Committee and will present their report for your consideration.
So just to clarify, when you say new for us, it's new to the council, not new to Waimea Water.
Can I refer that through the chair to Mike Drummond, who has been a bit closer to what has happened over the last few days? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Tim. My understanding is the Waimea Water Board met Friday of last week. I would expect that these matters were considered by the board then. Then subsequent to that, the communications were made to the shareholders. Such a question about when additional costs may have been identified or when they likely delay in the project was identified, I'd better put to the CEO of Waimea Water Limited, Mike Scott, when he presents in the Operations Committee later this morning.
Thank you. So on the subject of the report, some 2.5 years ago, I said this council had no idea that the impact COVID was about to have as we were spending another $1 million of unbudgeted money. The mayor informed me you were very well informed. 2 weeks later, we were in our first level 4 lockdown. And a couple of weeks later, we were voting through a rate freeze. When the dam was first announced to go to 158 million, I said anyone who believed that it would be delivered for 158 million had rocks in their head. 12 months ago, we were here approving the current annual plan. And I asked this council what they were going to do when interest rates went to 6 or 8%. And I was widely scoffed at. Deputy Mayor told me that his information was they would be 2%. Here we are 12 months later. And I can see what you're doing. You're raising the rate cap and you're under-delivering. This council has stumbled from overspend to overspend, and many residents in Tasman are facing losing their homes to pay for your lack of prudence. I'm appalled to have witnessed a once fiscally healthy council to have fallen so far in so few years. And I see no abatement of our grandiose spending in the near future. So I can't support where we're going, the direction we're taking as a council.
Thank you, Councillor McNamara, Councillor Ogilvie, and then Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I proposing an amendment to the draft resolution. I've given a copy to Robin, if she can put that on the screen, she doesn't mind. If you refer to page 70 of your agenda, it's item 4.9 and bullet point 7. And the amendment is that to indicate that the budget of 100,000 would fund a loan of approximately 1.5 million for capital expenditure to commence implementation of a draft motivated cash management plan. The only change to what is proposed in the annual plan draft or the resolution is that 100,000 in the plan itself is an amount for 1 year. What I'm suggesting or recommending, and hopefully quite strongly, that 100,000 be the basis for a loan of no less than 1.5 million. The 100,000 will do very little in terms of looking at the problems, the concerns, the issues for Motueka stormwater. I mean, I mentioned this time and time again, so I'm not going to go over those at all. But if we use the 100,000 for a loan, the 1.5 million loan will do some significant work in restoring some of the, I think, the issues or helping the issues in Motueka stormwater. So the amendment essentially is, as I say, is on the screen, budget 100,000 to fund a loan of no less than 1.5 million for capital expenditure to commence implementation of the draft Motueka catchment plan. So that's the amendments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. I will ask if there is a seconder.
I'm happy to second.
Oh, thank you.
So it's been seconded. I'll just ask Mike to comment on the, I guess, the basis. My understanding is that the $100,000 is already borrowed as opposed to being cash, and hence that does pose some tricky questions around Councillor Ogilvie's rationale.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the $100,000 is capital expenditure, so it's a $100,000 loan, and would have in the range of $6,000 to $7,000 cost to service that loan during the annual plan year. The proposal by Councillor Ogilvie would increase that $6,000 to $7,000 to $100,000. This would require us to recalculate and restrike rates, and would put our obligations to have the annual plan adopted in the statutory timeframe at risk.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The amendment is now open for debate. Councillor Greening.
Can I just get some clarification? We've just embarked without any impact on the proposed annual plan for a $10 million increase to the dam, which will be loan funded and which will be substantially larger than the 1.5 million, which has an interest cost here of 100K. So I'm just interested how that lines up against the earlier discussion. What's the difference here?
Mike.
Through Mr. Mayor, there's a significant difference between the two proposals. The addition, through you, Mr. Mayor, the funding for the dam is likely to occur in the last quarter of the year. With the timing of the dam still subject to movements in the construction program, it may occur somewhat later than that. So it occurs quite late in the year. We're currently in negotiations with Waimea Water Limited and with Waimea Irrigators Limited over how the cost overruns are funded. So currently that conversation involves the $20 million increase. It will now morph into a conversation that involves a $30 million increase. So it would be premature to make any assumptions about how that funding will occur. For example, some of that debt or all of that debt could find its way onto the Waimea Water Limited balance sheet with the servicing cost met through water charges, either to council or to council and to irrigators. For that reason, it's distinctly different than the proposal of Councillor Ogilvie, where the funding would occur early, essentially in the annual plan year, with all of the costs needing to be met in the annual plan year. So they are not the same, they don't have the same financial impact on council.
Thank you, Mike. Other questions or comments? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. Look, my hand was up for a general comment, not about Councillor Ogilvy's amendment, but I will just make a comment on Councillor Ogilvy's amendment at this point, and then we can come back to my other point later. Just to be clear that I can't support the amendment as it's been put forward. This late in the process, adding a capital expenditure item of 1.5 million without staff, the staff recommendation on it, I just don't think that that's a thing that we can do this late in the process. We have had substantial discussions around this over the last several months at various workshops. So to be clear, I can't support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Mackenzie, I can't support this, having been through the whole Motueka catchment management plan and the processes around that. And my question for staff is, even if we were to approve this, could we actually do this work? Because I was under the impression that we would have challenges to do that amount of work within the year.
Through the Mayor, may I invite Walter Whitman up to address that?
Walter. So Councillor Ogilvy, you'll get a right of reply as the mover of the amendment. So.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. The 1.5 million wouldn't be enough to solve extreme flooding that's causing flooding of habitable floors, and that's been the approach of the catchment management plan. It would go some way to address nuisance flooding. The question there is, does that provide good value for money? Spending 1.5 million on solving nuisance flooding. The approach that we're taking in the catchment management plan is to spend some money, but not too much, on solving nuisance flooding, but also acknowledging that the really big issues in Motueka are just a lot more expensive than 1.5 to solve.
Thank you.
Through the Mayor, may I just add, if the question, was in relation to can we actually restrike the rates, redo the annual plan in time for the 30th, I'd have to say that's extremely challenging. We would have to have all of that work done by Monday if we were to meet our statutory timeframes for putting reports up and so on and so forth. I think that introduces an enormous amount of risk to the process.
Thank you, Drain. Yeah, it actually did include both, so you've covered it off well. Thank you. So it seems really late in the piece when we had, as Councillor Mackenzie said, lots of opportunities to discuss this, and we have discussed this particular one prior. So it seems really late to bring it to the party at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. Councillor Tufnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I have a large degree of sympathy for Councillor Ogilvy and the problems of Motueka, we have, as been previously mentioned, this had quite a significant amount of discussion on this, and I think I'm of the opinion that the problem is extremely large, and I think we're sort of just jumping ahead too quickly on this. So therefore, I cannot support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? I'll come back to Councillor Ogilvy for some final comments before I put the resolution. If not, Councillor Ogilvy.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm extremely disappointed with the response from councillors. The 100,000 need not be loan funded. That's a start. To add 100,000 onto the your rate, the stormwater rate, targeted rate, and probably in the council here, there's probably 3, maybe 5 of us who pay that rate. Currently, it's about $280 per year. A year ago, it was 303. In our year coming up, it's going to be pretty much the same as it was, maybe a fraction less, 275. The 100,000 will add, and there's about 15,000 people who pay that stormwater rate, will add only $6 or $7 to that rate. The 1.5 million I'm talking about could therefore be quite easily funded by that $6 or $7 of stormwater rate. Now, I know where Mike Drummond or the financial officer is coming from, but it need not be as bad or as serious as he's painting. Secondly, I asked in June last year that we placehold $10 million for major works in stormwater in Motueka, and that was lost. I altered that in November, December again of last year to 5 million. Here I'm asking for 1.5 million. There should be some degree of responsibility being shown by councillors towards some of the issues in Motueka, and there's not. We're talking about, I hear Walter saying, look, this is nuisance flooding. I'm looking at something which has got a vision, because there are issues there which are going to cost a lot of money. I mentioned at the May meeting, for example, about the largest rain event we'd had in the last 10 years, April 2013. We had 70 mils or 75 mils in the space of a few hours. Richmond had 114 millimetres in that time. Caused major damage in Richmond. Since then, we've had a big upgrade of Queen Street. The stormwater cost for that was probably close to 10 million. We've had Bork Creek already costing probably 15, maybe even 20 million. As a direct result of that April 2013 flood. Our 70 millimetre flood in 2013 was basically funded out of reserves and been less than $1 million. If the situation had reversed, if we'd had the 114 millimetres and Richmond had the 70, the effect on areas in Motueka, particularly Motueka North, would have been quite almost disastrous. The rain event we had was what we call a 1 in 5 year event. Anything around that figure, we can sustain. Above 1.5, we can't. Now, perhaps it's our geography, perhaps where we are in terms of the mountains and the hills, we have been quite lucky to have had minimal flooding in terms of rain events. That one in 2013 was, in my 60 years in being Motueka, was the largest. We had some in 2003 and 1987, but not as large as that one in 2013. But sooner or later, it's going to happen. North Shore, Gisborne, Ashburton, lots of them live in around the country. It's almost inevitable it's going to happen. Another point I want to make is that this year, as we'll find out this afternoon with the operations, something like $6 million is in the budget for the 21-22 year, this current year, for Richmond. Next year, it's 8.1 million in the long-term plan. That's 14.3 million in these 2 years, 21 to 23. I'm asking for 1.5 million. You know, again, think about the responsibility we have as mayor and councillors towards the concerns in Motueka. We put a huge amount of money into Bork Creek. It's probably the only drain which services Richmond. It goes out to sea. In Motueka, we've got the Woodlands drain. We've got the Thorpe drain. We have the Lums drain, the Aramati drain. We have about 6 or 7 drains on the coastline, all going out to the bay. Now that's because of the contours of Motueka, the low-lying nature of the town, and how long it takes the water to go from point A out to the sea. We need that number of drainage systems. So the 1.5 million isn't going to resolve all of those, but it could help immensely. Again, I'm asking, please reconsider your attitudes. The 1.5 million isn't the end of the world. And it's not going to be a huge issue in terms of our residents, our ratepayers and the like. But it could do a lot of work, significant work, to address one or two of the main issues in Motueka for stormwater. It's not going to go away. I may go away, but the issues there are not going to go away. We need some vision and we need some funding. And the 1.5 million can be something towards that. So please reconsider your attitudes, vote for the amendment. It's not going to be a major concern for the ratepayers who are paying the stormwater rate, but it will be quite a significant issue for Motueka. I'll ask for a division, Mr. Mayor, please.
Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. So again, we'll do the vote by division. Robin. The amendment, yep.
Deputy Mayor Bryant,
Against.
Councillor Butler, Councillor Dowler,
Against.
Councillor Greening,
Oh,
Councillor Hill,
Against.
Mayor King,
Against.
Councillor Mackenzie,
Against.
Councillor McNamara,
Against.
Councillor Ogilvie, Councillor Tufnell, Councillor Turley,
For.
Councillor Walker,
For.
The motion is lost. So the resolution remains unamended. And so we're back to the debate / discussion / commentary. I'll come to you, Councillor Ogilvie, on the substantive motion. And I have Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Bryant and Councillor Ogilvie who wish to speak at this point. And Councillor Greening.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points that I want to make. And firstly, you know, I definitely do want to acknowledge the impact on households of an increase in rates. I think we can all see across our communities that these times that we're living in are really biting on households, and this will add to that. I do note, though, that it's very interesting with the consultation on the annual plan that we did only have 51 submitters, and it's certainly, you know, causing me to ask the question about the way we run the consultation. You know, why is it that so few people are actually engaging in this? And I don't have the answer, but I think it's interesting. The thing that does come to my mind, though, is actually the resilience of the plan, because it's very dynamic at the moment out there in our economy. And I would be interested just perhaps in the staff comment around how we are going to adapt during the next 12 months to those changing situations when we sign off this plan. Because the thing that we know about a plan is that the day that you approve it is the day that it becomes out of date. And when I think about that, I was obviously reviewing our papers for the Operations Committee, looking at the tracking of expenditure and revenues in the current financial year. And I do just wonder whether we need to consider really carefully the idea of carry forwards and what they get applied to. And that's in our operating expenditure and in our capital expenditure, because, you know, if the history is that we've had significant carry forwards every year, then in actual fact that's a bow wave that we could actually make different decisions about. So I'm happy. I thank the staff for the work that they've done, and I'm happy to support the resolutions as they are. But yeah, I would be interested in a comment on the resilience of the plan.
Who would like to answer the question, resilience, adaptability, etc.?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's definitely fair to say that with what's happening in the world, what we're doing here is very much impacted by that. Very shortly after the adoption of this annual plan, we essentially start work on the 23-24 annual plan, and indeed start preparing for a forecast of this budget. As you say, as soon as we adopt it, it has moved on. So we'll be giving staff the opportunity to reforecast and to look at that following year's annual plan. I think that will be with a lot of thought by the executive leadership team in terms of writing instructions around what should be considered as we look at it. We're already aware that we've got pressures around interest rates, around salary costs, etc. in 23-24 that we need to look at. So it's certainly going to be a difficult process. Essentially, though, we'll be coming back to you this side of Christmas with a sort of first look at those figures for you to see what they look like. But yeah, that's going to be key to being able to put something in front of you this time next year to adopt, essentially, is to look at all those drivers and really look at our base costs, etc.
Thank you. Councillor Greening.
I have one question, and I might respond to some other observations and then just make some more general observations. My first question just relates to what appears to be some expansion into pedestrian improvements along Salisbury, etc. And I'm just concerned that that doesn't turn into more traffic lights down Salisbury Road. So perhaps they could enlighten us as to what that may or may not include. And I think generally this council hasn't been supportive, at least since I've been here, with putting more traffic lights or pedestrian lights that stop the flow of traffic down that road in the way that it's already occurring. So I was wondering if I could get some direction from staff that that will not be the case from these pedestrian improvements.
Rich Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, there's no intention to put traffic lights down Salisbury Road. In fact, what we're doing is we're putting a couple of more raised pavement crossings, similar to what we've done on the corner where Countdown is, along in front of the primary school and the college, or the intermediate and the college, but no more traffic lights on Salisbury Road.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Councillor Green.
Very much reassuring. I do share Councillor Ogilvy's frustration with the priorities that are in this plan. I know he's spoken about Borwick Creek and Richmond Stormwater. I mean, Richmond Stormwater has been kicked down the road ever since Mayor Kempthorne was here, and Washbourne Drive improvements and Washbourne Park stormwater improvements just seem to have evaporated off our horizon, I suppose, and I imagine that's the frustration that's now appearing in Motueka. Yes, there is a real risk of flooding in Richmond South, given the recent rain events that crossed across the North Island and fortunately didn't make their way here, but it certainly caused a lot of damage up north. And we've also experienced that damage when it does cut across our path quite extensively. Yep, Borwick Creek is critical. There is no point making improvements further up in Richmond if the water can't go anywhere. So I've been very supportive of Borwick Creek improvements, but there's still the connection between Richmond and Borwick Creek that needs to occur, because if it doesn't occur, there will be substantial flooding and a lot of damage to a lot of homes in Richmond. And that is still a concern for a number of residents who went through that experience and incurred a lot of cost. Some residents eventually left because they couldn't afford to improve their homes, which is really sad. And other people obviously got a good bargain and did them up. So I am concerned that we're not really addressing some of the big priorities earlier. There's still some glossy projects which obviously get people's attention, both in this plan and in the long-term plan. I do struggle with Councillor Ogilvy's requirement at the last minute for stormwater when that could have been traded off against a swimming pool roof or something like that, which I would have thought was less important. But apparently that's going through in our long-term plan. I do make the observation, which I think is a good one by Councillor McKenzie, of the frustration people are having. We got 51 submitters, but if you notice some of the comments coming through those submissions, in fact, I read a couple of them, which I thought were really on point, but the general theme was they put in their submission and at the end of it, they go, well, you won't listen anyway. Really a struggle with putting in a submission. And I'm starting to sense that in the community, that the community are frustrated with council not listening to them, and they are starting to give up with submissions. It's no surprise that our Lagoima requests go up as there becomes discontent in the community. We used to have a council that was very open and transparent and had very little Lagoima and had really good engagement. And I feel that this council has been on a trajectory of going the other way, when our aspiration was to be more transparent and open, where the community could effectively talk directly to the engineer rather than going through a comms person. I want to make a general observation on this plan. And I know I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record, and I appreciate that I'm not necessarily within the majority of council who have supported this plan. I remember at the start of this term raising my concerns looking further out at potential cost blowouts and basically the whole fiscal environment not looking too healthy. And I raised that at our first committee meeting of that year, which I think was led by Councillor Manning at the time as the chair of that committee. And I raised my concerns about the need for council to embark on cost reductions now so that the impact is not as drastic or brutal if it has to be done later. You do it in a controlled way. I was told we'll deal with that in the long-term plan. So kick down the road yet again, 9 months later, surprise, surprise, the rates cap is removed and our debt cap goes up. Did we even address cost reductions? No, we just increased our ability to borrow more, raise more rates from ratepayers, and as we've just done in the earlier session, increased on an ongoing basis a lot of costs that the community incur through increased charges. When you read the submissions, you get a really good strong sense that these are starting to hurt, that these are unaffordable, unsustainable is what I would probably suggest. There is a lot of pain out there, and even in our report against, I suppose, against our own benchmarks, if you read page 121, we've failed one of our benchmarks, affordability. What I'm also concerned about is that, yet again, we're getting more FTE or staff creep into the plan. We're getting more wage adjustments creeping into the plan. This is in an environment where if you gaze across the public service generally, there are wage caps in place and there are cost reductions. You're seeing central government agencies consolidate costs, consolidate leases, and operate more effectively and more efficiently. And in a way, COVID has probably helped that by allowing organisations to work remotely and therefore the ability to consolidate costs. Certainly that's what I've seen. So I hope that this council doesn't embark on yet more property acquisitions further down the track in some grandiose bid to keep on building. I think this council, longer term, is not in a good financial position. It needs to look at cost reduction. I don't think it really has. I think it's going to become more painful. I always describe this organisation as a bit of a container ship. You need to start turning earlier Otherwise, if you turn too hard, you could tip it all over. Unfortunately, I think that this council's failed in that regard, and potentially another council may have to be a little bit more brutal, and that's unfortunate. We're again kicking infrastructure downstream, and I think that's Councillor Ogilvy's frustration. So I support it in that sense because I think stormwater is really important, and there are other facets in this annual plan that are not as important as stormwater. Protecting people's homes should be our first goal before we start embarking on the glossy stuff. And often the glossy stuff is tied up with attractive discounts to motivate us to keep on spending when we really need to sit back and go, can we really afford this? Even though it's really good to do, unfortunately, this council has put all its eggs in one basket and is now trying to eat its cake as well as keep its cake at the same time. And you can't do that. You only have to look across the business community to see how they have rationalised and have been forced to rationalise their operations. And I think this has been a failing generally of this council and unfortunately a reflection of this plan. So again, I'll be calling a division for the vote on this. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Greening. Other comments? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just reflecting on the last speaker's words, I actually don't support the concept of austerity, which is where I think he is coming from. I acknowledge that it is going to be difficult for our community to pay more rates. There are more and more pressures to mitigate the effects of climate change, and these pressures are only going to increase. There are more and more requirements from central government as regards our regional council function, and these are going to increase. And I do respect where Councillor Ogilvy is coming from as regards the Motueka stormwater. This is, as he says, these pressures are also going to increase, but it's simply not feasible to alter the financial plan at this point. But I do feel that there has been a lack of clarity around the Motueka stormwater plan, and I would like to see more clarity going into the future and in future planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, Councillor Dowler, and then Councillor Tufnell.
Similar to Councillor Butler, just briefly on the Motueka stormwater plan, in the back of my mind, I supported what David did, but there's no plan what the 1.5 million would have been spent on. I could only approve it if I saw something in black and white that actually showed me that there was going to be an improvement. I think it needs to go to the next long-term plan. So in the next few months, I think staff need to be given direction, if that's what the council want to do, to go away and come back with a plan to tell us how the money can be spent to make the improvements that are needed. The actual annual plan itself, we've done a pretty good job. We've kicked it around the table here quite a few times. We've listened to what some people said and kept it at 5.05. Others wanted it at 7.7, so we didn't lose any improvements. I think we've done a pretty good job, and I'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dowler. Councillor Tufnell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I support the motion. One of the things that we do struggle with a little bit sometimes, and that going on from where Councillor Mackenzie was on the carry forwards, but I think that's an area which has improved in fact lately. We have to cope with change, and this comes through, and this is why rates and everything else go up. I'm unsure what glossy things that we could actually remove, because we live in a community, we have to have more, I'm sorry, I'm struggling a bit with this, but we have to have more than roads and things. We have parks and reserves and all these sorts of things. A little bit of glossiness is actually required to have a happy and healthy community. So on that basis, I'm supporting the motion.
Thank you, councillor Tufnell. Councillor Ogilvie.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Can I refer you please to page 125 of the agenda? (125) of the agenda is the statement of the reserves. And what I'm going to refer you to in particular is the community housing reserve. Shows there currently 1st of July 2022, it will be 810,000. And in the last column, by the end of this 2022-2023 year, there's going to be 959,000. Now that isn't rates money. That's money contributed by our pensioners who occupy those houses. What I'm going to recommend, I know this is late and it hasn't been discussed or gone through long-term plans or anything. I'm going to suggest, recommend, move an amendment that each pensioner be given or made a payment of $500. Now, that's extraordinary, I know, but they just had a very large increase in their rent. I've discussed this some weeks or months ago with Mr. Drummond, and his answer was no, it would be inappropriate as a rent reduction. But this would be a grant, an inflationary-based grant, because of that huge amount of money in that particular fund. It's their money. It's a matter of basically giving back to them, basically $10 a week. It could be made from the July the 1st quite comfortably. So that's the amendment, Mr. Mayor, $500 as a grant to each pensioner in those units. There's 105 of them. So we're looking at about 500,000. Sorry, what am I saying? A lot. 100, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice to have a sense of humour somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so that's the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Okay, unfortunately, Councillor Ogilvie, your amendment lapses for lack of a seconder.
Both Councillor Dowler and Councillor Butler have mentioned my previous amendment, and there was no plan. Look, we've had a Tonkin and Taylor plan. We have a draft catch management plan. I could have proposed where $1 million or $1.5 million could be spent. I left it to the staff to come up with probably the highest priority. And that's why I did not specify or use Tonkin and Taylor or use the draft cash management plan as to where the money could be spent. There are lots of options there. I think to say, oh, there are no options there with no plan there really is a bit kicking for touch and trying to explain why we haven't supported an amendment when they probably want to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. Councillor Walker, is your hand up?
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to vent this, that, you know, everybody's pushed back against what Councillor Ogilvie has presented today, but, you know, that Councillor Ogilvie has been grinding away at this, and every time he has tabled this, he has been shut down. And I find it quite insulting, actually, that other councillors can sit there saying there is no plan and it's the 11th hour. I give him his dues that he has worked solidly and tried and tried. So good on him today for tabling it, albeit the 11th hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I think Councillor Ogilvie may have lost the vote. I'm not necessarily sure he's been shut down, and there has been a significant discussion and debate about this. Like, I commend Councillor Ogilvie's passion for stormwater in Motueka, but equally I understand that there is a lot of people with passions around this table, whether it's on climate change or biodiversity management, our regional council functions, or addressing the myriad of issues we have across the board. And everyone would probably like another $1.5 million for something that they're passionate about, or another 100,000. And unfortunately, if we get into that process, then we never manage to arrive. That's why we go through the process of steps and debates and votes. So in no way am I, and I don't think any other councillors are suggesting that Councillor Ogilvie, they have disagreed with him at the vote, but that's as much about the process and the challenges and the priorities, which we all have differing views on. I think that's been our strength, actually, for these last 3 years of almost unimaginable challenges, many unforeseen. Some people obviously foresaw them better than others, and commend for them for seeing so far ahead and being so accurate. But we've addressed as we've gone as best as we can. And we've arrived at a point, given all of those challenges, at a rate increase that's at 5%. Just over 5%. In the circumstances and looking around the country where people are facing different but not lesser challenges, whether that's regional councils with their hats on, whether that's TAs with their challenges. And I think we've arrived at a spot. I understand the difficulties. Costs across the board are impacting on everybody. Many of those costs impact directly on us and our projects and those costs. So whether it's fuel, whether it's materials, all of those things impact, and we end up passing them on like other businesses have to, from hospitality through to retail, through to everything else. And we're in the same boat. So I think the fact that we do have differing views, differing passions, differing priorities, but we've actually managed to debate them pragmatically and practically in a generally very good tone. And I'd hate to see that, not be the case. So thank you for your comments, Councillor Walker. And I share your views of Councillor Ogilvie's passion about stormwater in Motueka. But unfortunately, when it's come to the vote, he just hasn't managed to get enough people over the line. Are there any further comments in relation to the annual plan resolution before I come back to Councillor Bryant for his right of reply? Councillor Turley. Sorry, Councillor Turley, my apologies.
There's just 2 points I'd like to make firstly about Councillor Ogilvie's amendment on the pension grant. I think that money should go towards further social housing, so that's why I couldn't support that. And as far as the annual plan is concerned, the elephant in the room is undeniably the Waimea Community Dam. I prefer to call it the Lee Valley Dam. I thought it was a subtle change by the previous council to call it a community dam when it was never supported by the community as they hoped. And the option was not the best one for obtaining aquifer recharge, and it was built on shaky, crumbling rock. So there's no way that I'm going to be able to support this plan when the money for the dam keeps going up and up and up. Every meeting we had, once it was accepted, we were asked to produce more funding. And this is at the expense of other things that council should be doing. So, yeah, the ratepayers are ending up carrying the main burden of this, and yet they don't use the greatest part of the water. And so I would call on the irrigators and industry to actually, I know they're general ratepayers as well, but it's a business cost for them. And they do pass their costs on, as we will have seen in the supermarkets and where we buy our vegetables and fruit and things. So, yeah, I think I would really encourage them to participate in paying the cost overruns for this dam.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Anything further? If not, I'll come across. Councillor Greening, and you've had a fairly extensive amount of commentary, both questions, observations, and general comments. So if you've got something specific and relatively brief, I will give you the opportunity to speak.
I'm speaking because no one else put their hand up and you gave the opportunity to speak.
Just because, no, I mean, we could be here all day if everyone puts their hand up because no one else has put their hand up. I think we've got a very clear understanding of your position on the plan and the resolution. So like I say, if it's specific question or specific comment, then please go ahead. But another extensive range of views and commentary and observations is probably not necessary at this point.
So it is a question. I think I've made my point clear, which obviously got across to you, so that's really good. My question is in relation to the loan funding of the dam rather than target rating. If we're not target rating this time, can a council reverse out those sums and then target rate? Or are we locked into this and can only target rate on any future increases?
Okay, yeah, that is a specific question. Thank you. Mike.
Through Mr. Mayor, a decision hasn't been made on target rating for the dam. You would be target rating interest costs, and typically the conversation has been around target rating interest costs in relation to irrigated capacity. As I noted earlier in the meeting, we're currently in conversations and negotiations with Waimea Water Limited and with Will, the irrigators. And the decisions that come out of those negotiations and come back to council will determine your future direction, including whether or not you put a targeted rate on. Typically, you can put a targeted rate on for to recover any balance you have. So within the activity, if there's a deficit within the activity, you can increase a future year's targeted rate to cover the deficit within the activity. But that would be a decision for the council of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Greening. I will come across to Councillor Bryant for his right of reply, and then I'll put the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the discussion we've just had shows the passion and enthusiasm that councillors have around this table, and particularly for their areas of their greatest passion. So I think the thing we have to accept is that this is a plan for the whole of council for the coming year. I know it's tough for people out there in the community. I represent one of the lowest socioeconomic communities, and people are feeling how tough it is and are worried about the future. The only saviour that we do have across the district is that we do have high employment and relatively easy for people to get jobs. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is some positivity out there. Councillor McKenzie and I attend a number of community councils where we, particularly Councillor McKenzie has discussed the annual plan or made those groups aware of it, and generally they've been supportive of the direction we're taking. And I think that's shown in the submissions. 50 or so is probably one of the lowest numbers I recall across the time that I've been hearing annual plans. So I think I think people are generally reluctantly accepting of what we're doing and understand the position we're in, because many of them are in similar with their own household budgets or businesses. Costs are increasing across the whole range of activities. So yeah, I think it's a good plan going forward, and hopefully we'll be able to enact most of the things in it. I do just want to finally thank staff for their passion and enthusiasm for getting this plan for us right from the outset when we did a little visionary, and then a number of workshops where everyone's had the opportunity to raise things they're particularly concerned about. Whether they've attended or not is up to most people's enthusiasm in some ways, I would say, for the role they have and their ability to get things done. But yeah, so with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to support the resolution, and once again thank Alan and the whole team across the whole of council that have had input into this. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. I will put the resolution. All those in favour, please say. Oh, my apologies, another division. Robin.
I'll start from the bottom up. Councillor Walker,
Against.
Councillor Turley,
Against.
Councillor Tufnell, Councillor Ogilvie, Councillor McNamara,
Against.
Councillor McKenzie,
For.
Mayor King,
For.
Councillor Hill,
For.
Councillor Greening,
Against.
Councillor Dowler,
For.
Councillor Butler, Deputy Mayor Bryant.
For. Six, five. So the resolution is carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the rate setting report. Matt.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, now with the adoption of the annual plan, this is a mechanical report to set the rates as per the legislation. So open to questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? There shouldn't be at this point in time. Someone prepared to move the resolution? Move Councillor Tufnell. Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Dowler. Yeah, so it's an operations committee meeting subsequent to the conclusion of this meeting. They can come in as a public meeting if they would like to sit and listen to the. Right. There doesn't appear to be much desire for further commentary, not surprisingly. So I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So just lastly, there are a couple of sets of minutes to approve from the annual plan submission hearing on the 18th of May. Someone willing to move those minutes?
Have they been circulated?
As far as I know. Yeah, move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favour, please say aye. And secondly, the annual plan deliberations from the 24th of May. Move Councillor Tufnell, seconded Councillor Butler. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That draws us to the conclusion of the council meeting, and so we'll now take a brief break, grab a cup of tea. The operations committee meeting will, separate Zoom for those on Zoom. So if you click back in. So we'll say call, well, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And we'll commence the operations committee meeting. Thank you.